The care, restoration and maintenance of church buildings can be a complex and initially daunting process, particularly when it comes to making changes or carrying out repairs to the fabric of the building. Many places of worship have special architectural and historic interest and are protected by law through listing. This means consent is required in order to make changes to the building. In this video, we discover more about some of the steps involved and who can help you with your plans from the very start. But just how important are these buildings in a historical context? Tim Wilkins from Historic England explains more.
They could not be more important. 45% of the Grade 1 and 2 star listed buildings in this country are places of worship. They are absolutely key to our historic environment. Look at any historic core of a village or a town and imagine the church not being there. They're so central to the communities that built them. If they're allowed to decay and fail, then we've just lost such a huge part of our history and heritage.
Any works which affect the character of a listed church building or one in a conservation area requires listed building consent. Places of worship are granted ecclesiastical exemption by the government. This allows each denomination to operate their own system for managing change that is as rigorous as secular listed building control. As part of this code of practice, consultations required with your denominational body, Historic England, the relevant national amenity bodies, and in some cases the local planning authority. Tim helps with technical advice on the repair of historic buildings. He understands the process and talks us through some of the steps involved.
Absolutely, first of all, of course, is the actual understanding the building itself, and then understanding its problems, and then you go from there. But it's really part of the process of informed conservation, that you don't start messing around with important historic buildings until you really thoroughly understand them. The critical document is the quinquennial inspection report. Now, those have been mandatory since 1955, and that was a very enlightened piece of legislation, because it means you've got a professional looking at these buildings once every 5 years. And they then draw up a list of the work that needs doing, how urgent it is, and that's the starting document really for a lot of this work. Funding is the next thing really that you need to sort out, because until you've sorted out what your sources of funding are and how much you've got, you can't start to put it together in phases. So you need to make those sort of decisions, so you've got some sort of idea of how the spending pattern is going to go, and therefore how you're fundraising, grant aid, whatever, however you're financing it. If the church can fund it out of its own resources, some of them can, and that's fine, and then they can just really go to an architect or surveyor and get the specifications drawn up, get the work tendered, and then the job happens. But it used to be the case that an awful lot of these repairs required grant aid. So if they come up against major repair issues, like they need a re-roofing or whatever, or they've got a dry rot outbreak or something, at the moment particularly, it's very difficult for them. And that is critical, because there's no point starting off if you haven't got any money, because nothing's going to happen.
Even though ecclesiastical exemption is granted to places of worship, some cases may still need local planning consent, and you should always seek expert and professional advice. Graham Darlington is a conservation officer for South Lakeland District Council. He gives the local planning authority advice on the impact of changes and explains how they can help with guidance if needed.
There's a lot of skills in local authority conservation circles. Most conservation officers have a good knowledge of architectural history, of fabric. They're able to give advice about what might be significant in their particular church or ecclesiastical building. And they can assist in terms of finding contractors who may be able to do that work, and just general guidance really that would hopefully make the process a lot more smooth.
Over time, many of our church buildings have been altered to meet changing needs. The desire for a comfortable environment with modern facilities and a flexible community space often means adapting our church buildings. Even though each denomination operates a different system for dealing with alterations or changes, many principles remain the same. Lily Hopkins is chair of the Carlisle Diocesan Advisory Committee and explains how important early conversations can be.
Well, we find it helpful to be involved as soon as possible. So rather than starting with a formal application, we will often be drawn into what we refer to as a preliminary inquiry, where we can come where you've just as a church had an idea, you may have spoken to the Archdeacon about it, and a party of specialists will come out, hear what you're trying to achieve, talk about ways of meeting that need, and sometimes we'll suggest going to look at another church which has been through the process and has got a finished result, just to help everybody understand the options that are available. You know, so you're not putting an application in blind without knowing whether this is going to have any feasibility of being approved or not.
Lily and her team visit churches before and also during a project to make sure everything is on track and chat through any concerns.
That's always exciting, going inside and seeing what's been done, isn't it?
So then,
Yes.
as you probably remember, the organ used to be down the back side
Indeed,
there,
blocking all the light from the window.
blocking all the light from the window. So that got moved at the last repair in 2015, and we also moved all the pews out from there, so we've now got a social area in the church. So the bit that we're now talking about, once we've done the repairs, is to improve the facilities of the church by putting in a toilet, which will just about fit behind the organ.
That gets hidden behind the organ, yes, in the compartment you've
and
started.
explains partly why the organ is not central, so that we actually get a passage down the side. And then the kitchen, which will be open, as the DAC quite rightly told us it had to be to let the light in,
Indeed, yes.
will be at the back there behind at the back of the
Yes.
north aisle. And hopefully we shall get that done September, October.
That would be wonderful.
That's
So
what we're
as
looking
things
at.
start hotting up with harvest
Yeah,
services
that's
and all
right.
the events of Advent and Christmas, it will be there.
And then
for
we
use.
can, yeah, and the idea is that we then get a church that not only can be used, but people will want to
Yes.
use.
Despite operating different systems, each denomination calls upon a range of experts and consultants who offer their skills on a voluntary basis.
Well, a lot of it is sharing information and knowledge. The committee is made up of a range of different specialists, so there are conservation architects, archaeologists, surveyors, people from the church background that understand the needs of a parish. You're not paying for an application for preliminary advice, and we don't have we'll only come out once. We will come out as we need, as your scheme to develop, so that you get something which can be worked up into a really good functioning scheme that meets all your aspirations. I mean, all listed buildings are of national importance, that's why they're on the list. But a grade 1 listed building, so the abbey churches within the county, are very, very important nationally, and there is a lot of interest in them. So alterations to that age of building with often unique features, there is an onus to consult the national heritage groups, Historic England, the church's own central advisors, and specialists in different eras, so Society for Protection of Ancient Buildings or the Georgian group, so that you're actually bringing that national knowledge together, something which may be a completely new problem to you. They are likely to have dealt with it somewhere else in the country and can give that perspective. It's very easy when you've known a church all your life to think, oh, there's nothing special about it, but very refreshing when you hear somebody from outside saying, but it's wonderful, nobody else has anything quite like this. So it's that collaboration, so that both the national heritage is preserved, but that we have living church buildings which can be a focus for their whole community.
As part of the process of change, every church will need to complete statements of significance and need. They'll give you a good understanding of the historical significance of your building and its contents, explain why you want to make the changes, and what impact they'll have on it. Architect Paul Grout explains more.
Statements of need and statements of significance are vital documents in the management of any building project like this at the early stages of it. The statement of need defines what it is and why the client wants to do a particular thing. And that can raise questions, because questions can be asked as to, why are you doing it like this and not like this? So the statement of need is a vital document, and then the statement of significance is particularly where it's a very important historic building, is obviously vital for defining what is important about the building. And it can be a more complicated thing than just a brief sort of history of the building, because you're trying to define why something is particularly important. And obviously what we're trying to do in altering buildings is not to ruin them in the process. So you've got to know what is important about it. And sometimes they're quite surprising things which you might not realise at the outset are important, but through perhaps a little bit of research, you discover what is important about them, and you kind of add to the history and the information about the building in the process of doing them. But those two things, the statement of need and the statement of significance, are kind of, if you can mould them together, then that's the basis, the sort of foundation for developing a good project, really.
As well as statements of significance and need, there are further areas an architect can help and advise.
Designing things is a process, really working right from the brief through the development of the design, which takes into account the significant parts of the building and so on. And once you've defined all that and got your approvals for all of that, you obviously move on to the construction stage. And this is where getting the right men for the job, and women for the job, is a very, very important, is in fact crucial. And so in this case here, we drew out what was required and wrote a detailed specification for what was required, and then sent that package of documents to a number of different contractors. And when you decide who to send that to, that's a very important moment, because you only want to send it to contractors that you know are capable of doing it properly. Getting the right men or women for the job is a very, very important thing, obviously.
Thoroughly understanding our buildings, statements of significance and need, information on planning, help with the construction process, and getting early advice are all essential steps.
My key piece of advice would be to consult as early as possible in the process, both with the local authorities and, if the building's Grade 1 or Grade 2, start with Historic England.
And there are other practical steps we can take to protect and care for our ancient buildings.
Maintenance is absolutely vital, and of course a lot of these, they're not so bad with these small Cumbrian rural churches, because they're relatively small. Once you get into more urban churches, then they're bigger, and you've got gutters at very high levels and all this sort of thing, and so just the access alone is very difficult. And of course these days, with the health and safety, people don't run up ladders. You've got to either have scaffolding or a cherry picker to get up to these things, and that in itself is an additional cost. So yes, I mean, all of these things are very challenging.
Challenging they may be, but the end results are more than worth it.
It's thrilling, because you've seen the church possibly at low ebb where things aren't working properly. You've been through what can be a frustrating process of getting more information and detail. And then at the end, when you come in and see that the building looks great and that it's working and people are happy using it, and more neighbours are coming, the community is doing things more happily in the church, and it's just tremendous. You know, it makes it all worthwhile. You've saved an important part of our heritage, and you have given something which will work well into the future.
If you're planning on making repairs or changes to your building, make sure you consult and work with professionals who can help you and you have the correct permissions in place. For more help and information, please visit our website at www.ctfc.org.uk.